Hello one and all, this is Robert James Fremantle recording this video as a reaction to Tim's wonderful video, A Games Master's Worst Enemy, and just what it is, that enemy that he implies in the video. Well, it's the inner demon, of course, that which is telling you that you are not good enough. And you know, I think he really struck some great points in that video. First thing I did upon watching it was to share it to all of my social networking outlets, because I think videos like that really need to get out there. Now I'm going to tackle this in a more conversational manner. This is going to be a reply back to Tim, but it's also going to open the reverse door back to all of you. So you've commented to him. Now I'm going to step forward and converse, put some other takes forward, and then you can comment to this, and then who knows, we might be, as a community, bouncing videos back and forth. But, you know, heck, you could call it the RPG brigade instead of, you know, community. But then I think back to the silly things that all happened with that, and I'm not going to go on a tangent here, but I think it is relevant. Because you remember how there was a load of nasty sort of silliness that all cropped up over the terminology of the way that was, that it was like suggested elitism or something like that, that I could infer from everything that was going on, which is just ridiculous. Because you know, anybody that comments, anybody that even just watches the videos and maybe gets anything from it, you know, they are also part of the RPG brigade, or you know, or if they want to be, they are. You know, it's not some exclusive bloody club. And I think the idea of like people getting funny about all of that as an issue, I think speaks volumes as to the things that can really wear a GM down. Yeah, and I think that's something that probably wore a lot of video makers down within their own community, you know, which I think is somewhat indicative of the sort of things that can happen at the table with the GM and the players. So I'm going to look at it from a slightly personal point of view with my situation, because a lot of the things that Tim said sort of struck home here. And one thing I'm going to look at is a lot, you know, after time you can start to get these insecurities, and you will always blow it up inside yourself because you want it to be good, obviously, and you're going to think, yes, indeed, they do seem to be bored, they don't seem to be reacting like they need to be. But sometimes you know that you've come to the table with a brilliant idea. You know, you've done all of the research that Tim mentions there. Yeah, you've put all of that prior time in. You know all of the spells that the mages are using. That's always an important factor, isn't it? It's not just like knowing the spells, but kind of like knowing how they're going to combine their spell sets with who else they're with and that sort of thing. How they're going to fight. You know, how they're used to fighting, rather than just coming in cold and saying, "Oh, what have they got?" like that, you know. And you've done all that prep. It's solid up here, and you're really looking forward to the game, and then you turn up to the table, and then for whatever reason, you know, actually, you know, contact with the players has turned it right round on its head, and suddenly you're not having a good time anymore. And that's a reality for me. That happens from time to time, and then at that point, because I'm convinced I'm not feeling it like I should be feeling it, you know, I'm convinced at that point that the players must be feeling that. And you know, I'm asking myself those internal questions. Is it me causing that? Is it them causing that? So I'm going to put on the table one of the things that I remember being said amongst the community very much by the ever prolific, the main man, Ander Wood, who stated that all of this is about player to GM and GM to player energy. Energy equals feedback, yeah? So that the point he made was that players need to give their GMs energy. They need to feed the GM, because it can sometimes feel like a thankless task. All of your players taking you for granted, and if they do that for too long, it will wear down wherever your line is, and it might be really, really high, but over time, you know, there's every danger that that's going to wear you away and away and away until you are threadbare and, you know, not getting enough energy back. And I'm fairly experienced enough to be able to recognize that and to, even at the table, say, well, I think it was a player energy situation. To which, actually, someone might say, oh, so, you know, it wasn't the GM's fault then, or whatever, which is obviously isn't great. But these things are never sort of like accepted, that it was a session that's definitely gone wrong. And sometimes I think to myself, well, maybe the players don't feel that that didn't work, but I would have liked it to work, and I thought it was going to, and, you know, just somehow it didn't. But sometimes you truly can feel the players aren't quite sort of there, and, you know, it is a it is a dual reliance system, yeah, because you know, how amped the GM will be dependent on how amped the players are. So, you know, if the players, for whatever reasons, you know, they may well have real life things upsetting them and things taking their mind off the game to the extent that it should be, but it's going to affect GM performance. You know, it's going to play tricks with his head, and he needs to sort that out within himself. But if there's a deficiency of incoming energy for him to deal with, and it was spot on with this, then, you know, he is not going to be able to manifest something, whether it's real or imaginary. It will eventually fester and turn into a tangible lack of production for the players. You know, the ideas will then be half-assed. So the players can break the GM, and if they do that, the GM will then break the players. You know, he's a mirror. He will bounce back, and the better a GM he is, the longer it will take for it to get to that position. Maybe if experience teaches him to the warning signs of it, but it can still happen. And the better a GM he is, also, the more energy in equal measure he will bounce back. You know, so think of it as like, you know, some of that will come into him, and then his ego will consume some of it, and something else will consume some of it, and the fact that he's just one GM trying to deal with like 6 players simultaneously will consume some of it, and his own bullshit in his life, his real life issues, will consume some of it, and then all those bits left over, he will try and then bounce back at those players. So there has to have been enough incoming at him, and I'm completely behind you, Underwood, completely behind you on this, because that is exactly how it works, at least from my point of view. So you've got to make sure that energy is still forthcoming. It's so important, isn't it? So, GM energy, GM self-criticism. But what about those occasions when maybe the GM might be feeling this campaign isn't working anymore, and what if the players were thinking the same thing? How do you know it's time to call it a day? You know, how do you know it's time to hang the gloves up? You might be thinking, we've still got such and such modules, we still want to do this, we haven't finished off these storylines, you know, we've got goals in mind and all these things. You might have taken a break away from it, you might have been feeling burnt out, you know, you might have come back to it with the hope of being refreshed, but you just can't recapture that old magic. So I ask now, as a very serious community question, if you've survived with me for the 9.5 minutes that we're up to so far, and if you have, then bless you, sir and madam. I want to say I do have at least 7% of my viewers as ladies, so hello to those. Sometimes they're all 03, you know, /flirt. So anyway, do you think that a campaign has a shelf life? Okay, and what influences it? And do you think playing just one system has a shelf life? Now, I mean, in our situation, we play more than one system, and different people GM them, so you know it gives you a break. But just after enough time, you can still have that lethargic outcome beginning, and you don't know if it's real or imagined. And the other thing is sometimes, you know, the players won't give you the right feedback, so you might even start seeking it if you're not really getting it. You as the GM might say, hey, you know, how was that then? And say, yeah, it was good. You know, like one person might say, or whatever, sort of thing like that. It's not really constructive, is it? These are just like bland keywords, aren't they? You know, that don't really serve to help you tidy up the internals to make the next session better. You know, you need constructive criticism to work off of, and again, I suppose that composes in with, as part of that player energy and feedback, some of that probably has to be criticism too. It's not necessarily a criticism against you personally either, because I think it's too easy to get caught up in that as an idea. It isn't necessarily all about you and, you know, about your ego trip. The criticism could be that you know, it's not necessarily right, or as right as it could be for the player. So, you know, it doesn't mean that your vision doesn't work. It just means maybe for that player your vision doesn't work so well. You know, these things happen, and part of the GM's responsibility is accounting for the needs and requirements of the players. Now, that doesn't mean pandering to it, right? Good example of this would be if your players are completely loot hungry. They've got like a MMO computer game mentality where they see health bars as things that jump up and down due to healing and damage, and they just want epic loot from enemies to drop out of enemies so they can pick them up and you know, take it away with them. You know, they want the next flashy sword, they want the next big upgrade, and you might see that things like that completely ruin the immersion for you as the GM, and you might say, well, I'm not going to run my campaign that way, and that's fine. Okay, you have to stick to those principles, because obviously the GM will run his campaign. He might say, I want it more, you know, I want it darker, more real. This isn't going to be so high fantasy, this particular campaign, or whatever. And obviously the more mature and experienced the player is, the easier that will come across as well. I tend to think sometimes that there is a shelf life on games and systems, but I think that shelf life is partly a product of damage done to the collective consciousness of the game based on a variety of things, one of which is player to GM and GM to player energy feedback. So some deep stuff we've spoken about there. Thanks, Tim, for your original video. And that has opened the door for counter conversation to manifest. I'll see you at the table.